creates the crisis of confidence within the Soviet leadership. As early as, I have quite a lot of stuff from the communist zone diaries and things in the book, from their own files, some of which is disappearing now because, what's his name, Putin is restricting access again. But I was fortunate in having material which other people haven't had. And one of the things I discovered was, for example, there's a diarist called Anatoly Cherneyev. Now, he's put his diaries online. He's a very interesting man. In 1982, he says, the way things are going, in 10 years' time, we're going to have a Russian Poland, by which he meant, of course, we're going to have the same collapse of communism here as the Poles have been happening in Poland. He was a year out. It happened in 9 years. But Gorbachev and the reformers within the Soviet Union saw that they would have to do something about this. First of all, they were being left behind by the West in general sense. Secondly, they were being left behind in the specific sense that privatization in the West was demonstrating the inability of their state industries to compete and to innovate. And thirdly, the move to an information economy from an industrial one happening in the West was something that they would have to compete with, but which caused them a real problem. Because the whole point about an information economy is that everyone has free access to information. And that's something which the Soviets never wanted to give their people, because part of their rule was control of information. One of the foundations of their rule was control of information. So they had to change in response to all these challenges. Well, I think you know what happened when they tried to change. When they tried to change, they found that the system was, as the Pope said it best, he said, Gorbachev is a good man, but communism is unreformable. And so it proved. When Gorbachev tried to reform communism, it ran away with him. The system couldn't cope, people began to act freely, and he was left with the choice of either cracking down and returning to the old system at the cost of falling further and further behind the modern world, or of allowing the system to collapse, which in a way is what he did. Now, there are many other aspects of this. I haven't talked about the installation of the missiles. I haven't talked about Reykjavik. I haven't talked about Star Wars. There are so many aspects that we can spend all night doing it. But I will just end by asking and answering the question. If it hadn't been for these three people, what would have happened? Well, there were contradictions in the Soviet system of a very deep kind. And ultimately, the Soviet system would have collapsed. But ultimately, it could be a very long time. And I think that I would have said that at least 20 or 30 years was shaved off of the possible life of the Soviet Union by Reagan, Thatcher, and the Pope. They brought the Soviet system to an end very quickly. After all, 13 years after the Pope was elected, the Soviet Union disappeared. And the second point is to say this. Generally speaking, when empires collapse, they do so amid bloodshed and chaos. In the case of the Soviet Union, I think probably less than 50 lives were lost in its collapse. Lives in Lithuania, in Estonia, in Georgia, around 50 people. 50 people is 50 sorrowful homes, but it is nothing like the catastrophe that could have occurred, and that did occur, for example, the number of deaths at the end of the Third Reich. So, why did this happen? It happened because the statesmanship of the three people I've been talking about, with Gorbachev playing an important subsidiary role. I regard Gorbachev more as effect than as cause, but he has to be given credit for not attempting to maintain the Soviet rule by force of arms. So, as I say, 13 years after they come into power, the Soviet system is gone. We now face that was very largely their work. They are now, for practical purposes, gone. I mean, Mrs. Thatcher is still alive, and she is no longer in power or in public life. We have very different problems, and we have different leaders. But the fact is, as Antonio Martino said to Mrs. Thatcher when she was elected, he said, when he was elected, his government was elected, he said, sent her a telegram saying, she sent a congratulatory telegram. He responded, we have great difficulty difficulties, but we have one advantage that you never had. We have your example. And I think, we have one advantage that they never had. We had their example.